Go.
Right, okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting. Can I firstly remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed, as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hands up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues or to grab the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or Democratic officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so they can at least be heard, can hear and be heard. Okay, those are the sort of housekeeping rules. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillors Jarvie and Parker, Chair.
Thank you. Any other apologies? No? Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June, agenda item 2.
Move the minutes.
Thank you. Anybody second those? Yeah. Is that seconded, Neil, or do you wish to say something?
Second the meeting, second the minutes.
That's seconded.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yep, okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Right, agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? No, thank you very much. Then agenda item 4 is a reference from Cabinet on the 7th of June, the consultation response to Welsh Government Race Equality Action Plan for an anti-racist Wales.
Good evening, Chair. I'll take this item if that's okay with you. As you said, this is a reference from Cabinet in June. They also subsequently considered the response to the consultation at their meeting on the 5th of July due to the timescales having changed for submitting the Council's response to the Welsh Government. That consultation deadline is the 15th of July, so any views of this committee that are made this evening will be considered by Cabinet and then supplied as supplementary information to the Council's draft response thereafter. The consultation is on the Race Equality Action Plan that Welsh Government have published. This work was started in the summer of 2020 when Jane Hutt, the Deputy Minister responsible for equalities, asked officials to develop an ambitious and radical race equality action plan for Wales. And committee will note that the plan that's attached to the papers this evening sets out its aim to make Wales an anti-racist nation and to make the Welsh Government and all public bodies become anti-racist organisations by 2030. It's a complex plan. It's 147 pages long. It covers about 64 goals and 340 individual actions across a range of 13 policy themes. There are 5 cross-cutting themes around data, engaging and funding of communities, impact assessments to inform better decision-making, services for individuals experiencing racism, and the role of informal volunteering to supplement those policy themes. And the plan outlines the Welsh Government expects public services and the third sector to have provided demonstrable leadership in this arena, to be self-motivated to comply with both the Equality Act and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, to have changed the experience of education, job seeking and career progression for ethnic minority people, and to provide equitable, culturally appropriate services, as well as providing a safe and nurturing workplace for ethnic minority people, to have implemented the policies that we agree to deliver, collected the right data, and to have recognised the differential impact of racism in different locations in Wales. Along with other local authorities, this council signed the Zero Racism Wales pledge last year, and committee will remember that previously we've reported on the work that started to review street names, monuments and building names in the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm pleased to see the work that is progressing around the council staff's ethnic minority network really taking hold, and we had a report from the chair of that network at Strategic Leadership Team this morning. The plan that's published by Welsh Government, though, makes it clear that there'll be even more of a concerted effort to become anti-racist across the public sector in a relatively short timescale. Appendix B to the report sets out a series of specific implications for local authorities that the WLGA have produced for us, and Appendix A sets out the draft consultation response for consideration by your committee this evening. The Council's consultation response is broadly supportive. It outlines what we support and what we identify as being potential barriers to the successful delivery of the Welsh Government plan. And it's been formulated by colleagues across the organisation, given the breadth of the implications and impacts. So there are some specific comments around our services, such as community cohesion, education, housing, etc. We set out our stall that this is ambitious and far-reaching. It's going to require significant resource in funding, staff time, training, and access to different skills and supports. We make the point that regular training around race equality is going to be needed to be made compulsory. It can't be seen as an add-on, and this needs to be something that is integral to the way that we design and deliver our services in the coming years. The Welsh Government set out their proposals for an accountability framework, and we think that that needs to be realistic given the timescales, the amount of resource and the scale of the task involved. And we also make a comment in the draft response, Chair, that it'll be important for the local authorities to have our own mechanism for managing and tracking our progress, and that should remain the responsibility of Cabinet and Scrutiny to oversee and scrutinise, in addition to the accountability arrangements that Welsh Government propose at a national level. Welsh Government set out a series of outcomes that they expect to see. We suggest that we think they should also set targets in order for us to identify and be able to monitor progress against them. And in order for us to deliver against this plan once it's finalised by the Welsh Government, we're going to need to put together our own in-depth action plan in order to be able to go about meeting the aims of the plan. And consideration is currently being given to how that sits alongside the Council's Strategic Equality Plan, which clearly will need to be revised to take into consideration this plan, but also whether we have something separate in order to make sure that there's the significant prominence, oversight and accountability for this work. So that's a really quick whistle-stop tour through what is a really detailed document, but I hope that was useful.
Thank you for that, Tom. I think, yeah, that was useful. It highlights points. I think it's a what appears to be a very ambitious plan with the timescale involved, but it's obviously, I think, something you'll all support. I've got Councillor Neil Thomas. Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Tom. It was a very brief report and a very long document. I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to something that isn't mentioned in the report, but is a new sort of development within the Vale, and that's the minority ethnic network and their contribution and the potential contributions they could be making to our responses to this, and the focusing the ideas on issues surrounding inequalities and racism within the Vale, and I urge all members and staff to engage with the MEN. It is a comparatively new organisation within the Vale. I think it works similarly to the way GLAM works, and I've asked for reports from them, and they work very strongly with HR. I've asked for reports from them and involvement with the Joint Consultative Forum and the unions. The unions are on board with this as well. and so it is a positive response from within the Vale staffing to this issue. I just wanted to draw this committee's attention to that and urge people to join or to support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Next, I've got Sandra, Councillor Sandra Perk. Sandra, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. I thought it was a very welcome report. I just wanted to speak a little bit about is it section part E of Appendix A. It talks about education, where there's an attainment gap based on ethnicity, but there is a greater ambition gap based on ethnicity. I just wondered where careers guidance comes in in the curriculum to actually counter this, and what the actual role of the officers are in ensuring that the careers guidance side encourages people to have aspirational thoughts, to actually see people in roles so that they can picture themselves in those roles as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit around the careers guidance side and where that fits into the education part of this report, please.
Do you want to say that, Tom, or is there someone from?
I think
education?
I was going to actually ask whether Morwen wanted to comment on that, because the points that Councillor Perks raises are exactly what the plan seems to be suggesting, that actually it is about having that support at a variety of different levels of the education system. But I'll hand over to somebody who's far more of a specialist and expert than I am.
Thank you, Tom. The Careers Service, Careers Wales, they provide that careers support for young people in schools. So it's not something that we really are involved with in our directorate. However, through the Strategic Equality Action Plan, which has now been shared with schools at a school level and how they're going to enact that, if you like, with their schools, we have been working with Tom and other colleagues across the whole of the council, actually, to find a way of engaging, not just us developing a plan that will be imposed on schools, but we've consulted with head teachers. Tom is working with WLGA on it as well, and we will be consulting with young people themselves too. I realise that doesn't exactly answer your question, but we are trying to do everything we can to engage with young people positively, and that would encompass as well the careers support that they get too in schools.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to make sure that it was dovetailing in together with the our education department, that the careers service is is overseeing what they're actually providing. I know that they're, sort of their policies, procedures are equal ops as well, but just to ensure that it marries up with what we as a local authority want to ensure our pupils receive in the careers guidance side of things as well.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? Or does anyone feel that we should be adding anything to the to what Cabinet has said already? I think it's a pretty comprehensive response to it. It is, as I said at the beginning, it is a difficult matter. It's I think it's quite a short time scale, and it's fine putting policies, etc., in place. It's a question of influencing people's attitudes, I think, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. But if members are happy to endorse what Cabinet has said, yes? Okay, you're all being very quiet tonight, so yeah, okay, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Chairman, can I have a formal seconding of that out loud just for the minute?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll second.
I'm happy.
Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you.
Not so quiet.
Yeah. Okay then, agenda item 5, impact of the coronavirus pandemic on social, emotional and mental health of children and young people in the Vale. So who's going to take
I will take that to start with, if that's okay, please, Chair.
No problem at all.
It's going to largely be a double act between myself and David, and Caris will also come in too. So for us, there's two parts really to this. Firstly, this came about as a result of the survey that was undertaken by the Children's Commissioner on the impact of the coronavirus on children and young people, as the title says. But then what we wanted to do, rather than just saying that this is the situation that we're in, we wanted to show you what, as a local authority, we have been doing to support our young people. And it became an 18-page report, as you will have seen, because it wasn't as straightforward as talking about what we have done since the pandemic. It was important to give some of the background information and context, really, as to what we were doing before the pandemic, which has enabled us to adapt very quickly to support the young people since the pandemic. And I would like to think that we were actually ahead of the game in the Vale of Glamorgan than many of the local authorities, and we have responded very quickly to some of the issues that have arisen as a result of the needs of our children and young people during the pandemic and subsequently. So I'm not going to read the report because we'll be here all night, but if it's okay with you, Chair, I will just highlight some of the key points, and then obviously I'll hand over to David, and if there's questions after, I'm all happy to answer. Apologies, my dog is barking in the background. Sorry. So there were two surveys, as you will have seen, from the Children's Commissioner, one in May 2020 and one in January 2021. I have asked the Children's Commissioner's office since then, are they going to do a follow-up since the children are back in school? And they don't seem to have plans to do so as yet, which I think is a bit of a shame, because some of the issues that were raised and identified within the reports may no longer be issues for those young people. Because situations have changed, they're back in school and their home situations, may have altered. But what she was clear about was that this information, it isn't about comparing local authorities against each other. It's not even about comparing us against Wales. It's about using this formatively to be able to support our own children and young people rather than any other purpose. So please bear that in mind. The survey was specific to the lockdown, and the questions you will have seen in the appendix reflect that. And it was about the children and young people, what they were experiencing at that time. And you'll have seen from the questions, it was about their emotions, their mental health and well-being, access to services, how they were managing to access education, and those sorts of questions. And it was adapted for younger children as well as older children, and also children who couldn't access that format, and they had a different format. Some of the key points from the survey was that most children felt safe most of the time, but there was an increase by the second survey of the number of young people who felt sad or worried. Children were exercising outdoors, they were talking with family members, and generally confident about their learning. And it was quite pleasing to see the number of young people who were using laptops effectively to access their learning. And you will have had reports previously from Trevor about the infrastructure and technology that has been given out to children and young people and families through his teams. The key headlines from the 12 to 18-year-old, it's not that much different really. Young people were using social media a lot. That was their way of accessing and supporting their supportive networks with their friends, but they're also working at home too. Although quite a few, over half, felt concerned about how lockdown could impact on their qualifications and weren't motivated to do their schoolwork. You've also had reports as well about blended learning and remote learning and online learning. And that became very, very quickly embedded by schools, and the young people were accessing it, which came out very clearly from those surveys. If I hand over to David, because he will pick up then from the point 2.3 on selfie.
Thank you, Morwen. Yeah, so it is a shame that there's not going to be any follow-up from the coronavirus and me surveys, but I think it's really important for you to be aware that within the Vale we have our own well-established survey of well-being, which we in fact has been in place since 2011, It has been adapted quite significantly since that time and has taken on the name now of SELFIE, which stands for Social Emotional Learning for Improvement in Education, which is now, we're in the digital age now, and it's an interactive platform that young people can access. And we do that twice a year, once in the autumn term and once in the summer term. And the vast majority of schools are part of that. So we survey around about 11,500, 12,000 pupils from year 2 every year, which I think is a huge achievement, really, and one which I'm not sure is replicated in many other local authorities to do a survey, twice a year on that scale. It's a different survey to the coronavirus and me. It works on the basis of looking at young people on a range of measures of positive social experience, negative social experiences, feelings of anger, worry, sadness, negative emotions about school, negative emotions outside of the school, and there are also questions around unkindness to others and unkindness to self. The questions, that makes it sound a little bit dry, but the questions are written in a very age appropriate and fun way. So so some of the key findings that came out of the SELFIE survey, strangely in the foundation phase there was a slight improvement in well-being after the lockdown, and sort of analysing that, for the majority of pupils, spending at that age, spending more time at home with parents, carers, appeared to be a positive experience. However, in Key Stage 2, there was an unusually mixed picture with deteriorations in levels of worry, sadness, negative emotions outside of school, and some around self-worth as well. And Key Stage 3 pupils showed more significant deterioration in 7 out of the 8 relevant emotional well-being areas. Now, I don't think any of us sitting here would be surprised to see that the massive impact of lockdown will have had a detrimental impact on young people. I don't think any of us would need necessarily a survey to tell us that is very likely to be the case. And I think talking to colleagues, and we're having meetings with partners in health and in children's services, social services generally, and we are all facing huge demands on services because of the unmet need during pandemic and the growing needs. However, as Morwen has stated, there were lots of concerns, and I'm sure I spoke to you previously in scrutiny committees around the deterioration in the social, emotional, mental health of young people before the pandemic. We were really witnessing this in schools, way before COVID hit. We in 2019 started the ball rolling. We had a head teacher conference in 2019 that focused on attachment and ACEs, and exploring the reasons why there were more difficulties in terms of complexity of social, emotional, mental health difficulties with young people, and worryingly with younger children as well. The age range was seemingly falling. And out of that, we established a social, emotional, mental health action plan, which since that time we've been implementing. So if I take a bit of time today, just highlighting some of the key things that we've done, some of the key actions that have stemmed from that. So one of the main things that we did was completely revamp our what was known as the Behaviour Support Service, which was, I suppose, in the vein of traditional behaviour support services, where we looked at rules, rewards, consequences, a very behaviourist approach to managing behaviour, and it was clear that we needed a much more psychologically informed team that could deal with the far more of the complexities that were evident in young people. So the engagement service was created, which is based at Ysgol y Derry, and all those staff now have undertaken extensive training, and they're all qualified trauma-informed practitioners with extensive knowledge of social, emotional, mental health difficulties and autism. So we have a highly skilled team now that is able to support mainstream schools to work with them and support them in meeting the needs of complex learners. And all of the work is based around the trauma-informed approach, ACEs, attachment, and the neuroscience of mental health and ill health. Now, in recent times, there is certainly what we've identified are capacity issues within that team in terms of meeting the increased need. There have been some local issues as well around illness and things like this. So there have been recent capacity issues, but those have been identified, and to reassure you, we have 2 new members of staff starting in that team in September, and we're also working with health in order to identify a clinical psychologist to work within that team, which again is a very different approach and a very forward-thinking approach. So that team has also been working on building the capacity in schools through training and professional learning, and I think you can see in the report. I won't go through all that in detail, but you can see there's a table in the report which identifies the extensive amount of training that has gone on. Now, I have to say that the vast majority of that would have happened pandemic or no pandemic. This was part of our strategy and what we thought we needed to do with schools. Now, obviously, we've had to add to that, and there has been some grant funding that has enabled us to add to that. So I think there's more training happened around therapeutic play, mental health first aid. These are the sort of things that we've been able to develop as well. And also a huge amount of resources have been purchased for schools around, there's the Action for Happiness toolkit, the Rainbow Pathway, which is a trauma-informed personal social PSE curriculum for all primary schools. So, library books, all sorts of equipment. So there's a huge amount gone into schools in order to support their work. We also felt, just one point on that, in terms of training, that it was really important to ensure that senior leaders in organisations had that training. Senior leaders across schools and across the directorate and across social services as well all undertook this 2-day senior leaders course in trauma-informed schools. There's been some really good partnership work going on as well. Just of note is the Resilience Project, which I describe in the report, which is working with the Mental Health Foundation. There's a clinical psychologist lead who works with a number of trained mental health workers and supports our secondary schools, particularly with complex cases, providing training for school staff, psychologically led consultation with school staff on pupil issues, and also group work and generally it's for those young people who don't meet criteria, who have complex needs but don't meet the criteria as set out by the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, CAMS as we refer to it. We also have done work in relation to adults within the school, because we recognise that it's not only children that have been impacted by the pandemic. There are many adults in school who have had a significant impact, and the pandemic has had a very traumatic effect on them as well. We also know that happy staff, create happy children and young people, and vice versa, obviously. So, alongside Coral Harper, who's the director of the Trauma and Mental Health Informed Schools, she's produced webinars, a 2-part webinar for schools on recovery from the pandemic, and that is directed at the adults in the school and all adults within the school. And also, looking at the Action for Happiness work to work and establish core emotional well-being and resilience for both pupils and staff. I'll take a little breath, and then I don't know, Caris, do you want to? I'll talk a little bit. I'll come back in, but just to have a rest from my voice. Maybe Caris can talk a little bit about what the Central South input has been into this, and I'll come back then and talk a bit about specialist provision.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, David. In terms of Central South input, in terms of well-being, there's 2 parts I want to make reference to. First of all, in terms of the work of the improvement partner, and then I'll make reference to curricular development work, which actually ties in with the next presentation that you will have later on today. In terms of the work of improvement partners, it's particularly during all of this academic year, and in terms of the lockdowns in particular, there's been a strong focus on well-being as part of the discussions between the improvement partner and the head teacher, and there's been a focus on the well-being of head teachers, staff and pupils. Part of the discussion, as we heard in the last scrutiny meeting, part of the discussion has also been focused on blended learning and remote learning. And again, as part of that provision, there's been a focus on pupils' well-being. And, sort of some examples of good practice from Vale of Glamorgan schools have been shared across the region. And in the report that you've received, there's reference, for example, to the work of Victoria Primary School. That's available in terms of a webinar, and also a podcast that involves input from Stanwell and Romilly Road as well. Sorry, Romilly Primary. So they're available for you to have a look at in your own time as well. And any guidance that are produced by CSE in this time also focused on well-being. So there's reference there to guidance that's been produced on remote learning, and there's reference there to health and well-being as part of that guidance. There's also been discussions between improvement partners and leaders on the use and impact of grants. So 2 grants in particular here, the Accelerated Learning Programme grant and the Pupil Development grant. And in both cases, there's been discussions and how that grant is being used to support pupil wellbeing. And then CSE as well, alongside other local authorities and regions and external partners, are working to provide a programme or a directory of support for staff on appropriate mental health and well-being. So again, that's been work that's ongoing at this moment. In terms of curriculum development, in terms of well-being, that relates closely to work in terms of the health and well-being area of learning and experience. And during this academic year, there's been termly network meetings with leaders who have responsibility for this AOLE, and they focused on how the work in this area promotes the 4 core purposes of the new curriculum, and also how to develop a vision for health and well-being. There's also been a regional project with 28 schools involved, 3 from the Vale of Glamorgan, Sir Richard Gwynn, y Bontfine and St Nicholas Church in Wales Primary, they've been working very closely on developing their whole school approach and vision for health and well-being. And the materials that have been created as part of that programme will be shared with a wider audience next academic year. In terms of next academic year, there'll also be an additional 3 focus areas in terms of well-being, and these really have come out of our understanding about the impact of COVID. The 3 are, in the sense, mental health and emotional well-being, physical health, and learner engagement and motivation. So in terms of the mental health and emotional well-being, there will be, as part of that work, action research undertaken with a group of schools, with case studies produced and shared across the region. There'll also be support for teachers to develop confidence in teaching aspects of mental health and emotional well-being. And then in terms of physical health, again, there'll be a professional learning programme focusing on developing physical activity as part of the curriculum programme and design. And then in terms of learner engagement and motivation, that will focus on the use of learner voice as part of curriculum design, and also on the quality of teaching and learning in the classroom. Shall I hand back over to you, David?
Thanks, Carys. Morwen, before we go into specialist provision, would you like just to do an outline of the youth service work that's also in the report?
Yes, of course. We had everything to plan, and David is now moving us around the agenda. That's fine. So the youth service, we have got an outstanding youth service. You've had feedback and reports on them before. We're really, really fortunate in the Vale that we still have a full service and team that provide both universal and targeted support. So you've seen within the report, and you know, I won't read through it all, but suffice to say, they have been absolutely flat out, whether it was working remotely with the young people during the pandemic, working at a distance outside, supporting the young people with you know, their well-being, with activities, with actual items that they needed to support their own health and well-being, but continued all the normal participation projects throughout it. So the youth participation, the youth cabinet, the rights ambassadors, all of those functions and everything else has continued, albeit differently. And some of the ways that it's changed will change for good. You know, I think you will also agree that some working practices that have been developed as a result of lockdown have been quite positive, and you know, we won't be getting rid of those. The digital participation has been very, very strong, and again, something else strong within that targeted team, and they've developed pop-up youth clubs and you know, many other projects as well across the Vale. The targeted team have continued support, and you know, those young people who are at risk of becoming not in education, employment or training, they work really closely with those. And last year, actually, our NEETs figures reduced, which seems to be contrary to what you would expect in the pandemic, but it did reduce, and I think that it highlights the quality of support that they were receiving, not just by the youth service, but from everybody. Our EOTAS programme still has continued, and those young people have been supported fully. And our youth wellbeing project, which is funded through Families First and through the advice line, Families First advice line, that is supported as well. Our young people who experience adverse childhood experiences. And as you can imagine, throughout the pandemic, those have actually increased, unfortunately, for many of those young people. I won't go on any further with those aspects because it is all highlighted within the report. But suffice to say, the support that they have given has been, you know, absolutely key to the young people. And something we are trying to develop is more engagement with the secondary schools themselves and the youth service, because I don't think the secondary schools are necessarily aware of all the support that is provided and is available. We've got quite a few new head teachers who, again, may not be aware of how good our youth service is, and we're starting to develop that further. And actually, only this evening, I've had an email to confirm that one member of our youth service will now be working at Pencoitra, based at Pencoitra, for 3 days a week from September to support some of their vulnerable young people, because as you know, Pencoitra is our most challenged secondary school. They have developed outstanding provision in what they're calling a Successful Future Centre to try and engage the young people, to prevent them from becoming excluded, to keep them in school rather than them not being excluded. And actually their exclusions are falling quite quickly because of the level of support they're doing. And we're providing as much support as we possibly can, including 3 days a week from one of our key youth members. David, should I pass back to you?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. So very much on the final stretch now. Just to say that just a word about specialist provision, because obviously for the most complex, we've looked at developing more specialist provision. So we have 2 resource bases, 1 foundation phase and 1 key stage 2. That's based at Gladstone Primary School. Again, you know, having provision for the foundation phase is not the norm, particularly if it's trauma informed, with, you know, again, highly trained staff as part of that, and that's something which I think is groundbreaking really in the Vale. In order to develop that further, we're now putting it, as you'll be aware, under the umbrella of Ysgolhaig. With the engagement service based there, it makes sense to use that expertise and to have it all under one, you know, one management system, if you like, and under one system. We're also looking to develop the PRU, and again, you'll be aware from previous discussions in Scrutiny around the development of the Centre of Learning and Wellbeing, which again will come under the umbrella of Ysgolhaig from 2021, before eventually we have a new site for that on Court Road. We've also very recently developed a provision for the most anxious. So we have a group of young people who have been unable to access school because of their anxiety. So we're developing a provision to meet their needs as well. So, you know, it's a long report. I could go on. There are other aspects of it, but I'm sure you'll have questions. But I really hope you get a sense of all the work that has been undertaken in this area, and you know, some of it is as a consequence of the pandemic, but like Maureen said, I think we'd identified that there were issues that needed to be addressed prior to the pandemic, and I think that has stood us in good stead as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I think, to be fair, for what is quite a lengthy and detailed report, I think between you've managed to sort of, you know, get it down to the important aspects of it. I can see that the cabinet member wants to comment as well. So perhaps, Liz, if you want to come in at this point.
I won't take up committee's time by adding to that report. I think it was a totally comprehensive review, and thank you ever so much for that. But I think that the one thing that that the report focuses on is the young people themselves, and this is a young people centred provision. And tomorrow I actually have to, well, not have, I will be meeting for 2 hours with the school council network. And the first question that those young people have put forward for discussion is increased support needed for pupils with mental health problems and an increase in anxiety related issues due to COVID. And I think it will be wonderful to be able to say to them, well, actually, there was a report to Scrutiny last night. This was the presentation, this is the document, and you can watch it online. And hopefully it will demonstrate to those young people how committed we are to supporting them, not just through their learning, but through their well-being and their mental health as well. So a huge thank you from me to the team for the phenomenal work before and during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go back now. I think to be fair, there were two in front of you, but I thought as cabinet member it was helpful to come in at that point. The Vice Chairman, Rhiannon, you want to make some comments or ask some questions?
I'd like to welcome the report. I mean, as you know, I've been asking about this for months because it became clear through my own work with schools on governing bodies, and obviously, you know, being a retired teacher, being in contact with lots of staff and children who were feeling the effects dramatically, far more than we thought they would. After the first few weeks of, oh look, I don't have to go to school, it then became, you know, a tremendous source of anxiety and distress for lots of children, that they simply couldn't carry on their lives as normal, far more than it seemed to be, far more visibly than it was for adults. And obviously the adults had no idea how to deal with them because they have their own problems in the same way. I mean, I'm on Victoria governing body, and I know that they had produced some excellent work because I've seen it, and been part of some of the work that they've been doing with children, trying to help them to adjust to what's going on around them and to assimilate what is happening and accepting that things are not the normal that they were brought up to expect. So I'm very pleased with that. I mean, I have seen the Wellbeing podcast and was impressed with it. You know, we all were. I mean, it's amazing how much staff are able to do when they're given the encouragement. Most of them already have the skills. It's simply a matter of, you know, directing them, codifying them, putting them into a framework, because many teachers are already doing these things. And what's heartening is seeing that staff are also being supported, because it's equally difficult for them working from home. Most of us rely on going into the staff room at various points during the day in order to create some kind of normality for ourselves outside the madness that is an hour in with year 7 or year 11, or a collection of primary school children who are constantly hanging on your, well, not quite your coattails, but it feels like it sometimes. So I'm very, very pleased with this, and I'm interested to see whether we're going to be following this up, because obviously these are all really, really brilliant projects. The report shows that the work is taking place across the board, all over the place, in all sorts of areas, but we're never going to return to what we were 18 months ago. I mean, some of the changes will have been for the better, you know, the ability to talk to children online and bring children who are reluctant school attenders back into the school fold. You know, this is obviously a good thing. I was impressed to hear about NEETs and how that's gone down. I mean, one dreads to think, you know, what we imagine teenagers doing when they've got nothing to do at home when the camera is off. I mean, we can all imagine, but obviously this hasn't been happening in the way that we thought it had, which is absolutely brilliant news. But no, I would like to be having, you know, updates on this and seeing how these projects are carried forward, because I think that they are tackling issues that perhaps haven't been fully recognised before lockdown and the change to our life occurred. Okay, I'd just like to thank everybody who's involved. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Jane, Councillor Norman.
Again, thank you very much. I don't know if I can come on screen. Oh yeah, here I am. Just to say again, thank you, and a very comprehensive and very interesting report. And I was just wondering, I don't know whether it's possible to answer this. Was there any significance in the data provided from children from urban schools or urban areas and more rural areas? Were the children in rural areas suffering more or have more problems because of their semi-isolation to start with than children in rural areas? I don't know if this is available, this type of information, or whether it's even relevant, but it's just something. Living in the rural Vale, I was just wondering if it did affect children in rural areas, especially children lived in very small villages, etc., if it affected them more than it did children living in such as Penarth Centre or Barry Centre, etc. But yeah, as I say, thank you very much for a very, very comprehensive report.
Thank you. We unfortunately we don't have data at that level. It's all anonymised, and we only see the Vale. We can't even, but because they didn't want us to compare against other local authorities, we couldn't even look at other more rural local authorities either. So no, we have got absolutely no way of determining that. However, that may come out through the self-fee that Dave talked about. The schools will see that themselves through their self-fee work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If I can add to that, Councillor Norman, it's not something we've focused on, but we can look at that through the selfie data. I think one thing that location, I think, has less to do with our rural. I can't say the word. Rurality, is that the word? Has less to do with than poverty, and I think poverty can be in a rural area and it can be in an urban area, and I think that's the big impact. And I think one of the things that we are seeing and are mindful of is COVID has also had an economic impact on many people, and with the economic impact come additional pressures for the adults that are then transferred onto the young people. Just on some of the points made by Councillor Birch, this has to be an ongoing work. Myself and Paula were in a meeting this morning, which was called Starting Well Partnership, and Councillor Burnett was there as well. This was a meeting across Cardiff and the Vale with health, social services, and education and other partners. And the key issue that was highlighted by everybody was top of the agenda was the impact of the coronavirus on the social, emotional, mental health. And we were all talking about the fact that we don't know the half of it yet, I don't think, in terms of the impact. And it is likely that there is so much unmet need out there that it is going to become very, very difficult to manage going forward, particularly in the short term. So we need to maintain these services, and we need to keep going with it. So this isn't just a one-off and can't be a one-off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Neil, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to echo all my colleagues' admiration and feel awestruck by the amount of work that's been going on over the last 18 months, and also for the quality of this report as well. I recall the discussions we were having prior to lockdown about the lowering of the age of children experiencing emotional and mental health problems and so forth. That was of course a concern then. But one of the comments that Councillor Norman mentioned, the rurality stuff, it struck me that we don't. Before we were partly concerned about whether there was any distinction or any difference in gender, the effects on different genders, and there's nothing in this report to distinguish between the genders. I'm just wondering whether that's because there isn't, or because it wasn't looked at. Thank you.
I think we didn't put anything in the report about it, but from the coronavirus and me survey, you will see, which is in Appendix 1, the whole service in Appendix 1, I believe that there you will see some aspects that are differentiated between boys and girls.
It'll be interesting to see what the next selfie data shows as well, because that will be, which has been compiled, but is isn't ready for analysis until that will be complete until the autumn term, because that will show the impact going forward. there is, Councillor Thomas, there is some definite evidence coming out of mental health services that there has been a greater impact on adolescent girls. They're presenting more to higher level services around anxiety, self-harm and things like this. So that it's an emerging picture. You know, all this is very tentative at the moment, but there is you know, that is what people are talking about at the moment in terms of a gender imbalance in terms of the impact of COVID.
As you'd expect, I'm asking because I thought there might be, but bear in mind it's not just male and female either. There are other genders that perhaps need to be included in the data, and whether they're being impacted adversely, more or less, as well. But thank you for that reply. It does confirm my suspicions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for that. Are there any other questions or comments? Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you for the comprehensive report. It's a really interesting reading, and you know, sort of the amount of work that's actually gone on, you know, sort of behind the scenes that enables you to write the report as well is amazing. What I did want to ask, and I don't know whether I missed it, was for the pupils who would be in years 11, 12 and 13, who the exam age children, was there any particular feedback of the stresses that they felt being in sort of lockdown situation, not having that sort of face-to-face teaching, if you like, when they were coming up to, I know that they were postponed, the GCSEs, A levels and things like that?
It's difficult to tell if it's those specific age groups really, because the second survey was, or the older survey was age 12 and up. So with young people between 12 and 18. However, what was highlighted, I think it was one of the points within the report, is about the anxieties they were feeling relating to their qualifications. So certainly that has been something that has raised. We've also dealt with a number of individual incidents and pupils, whether that's through school level or through parental concerns too. Yes, it's very understandable really that they've had those anxieties, but we can't differentiate within that particular report.
Okay, well, yeah, sometimes it's difficult, isn't it, with all the information that's there, but right, okay, well, I think to echo what everyone else has said, it is a comprehensive report. It was very interesting to read through it, and yeah, and thank you all for your contribution today. There were 3 recommendations. Well, the first one actually we've done because we've considered the results of the work that's been done. So, would someone like to move the other 2 recommendations?
Move those recommendations.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Agenda item, where are we now? Agenda item 6, the curriculum for Wales, the journey to 2022. That's almost sounds like qualifying for the World Cup or something. I don't know, or the Euros. That's what people call it, the journey to. But right, okay. I think we're gonna. I'm right in saying we're having a presentation on this, or rather than go through the report, because I'm sure we've all read the report. So, if you'd like to start the presentation, who's going?
Okay, my name's Natalie Gould.
Oh, there you are, yes.
Can you see me now? Yes, I've just turned my camera on. So I'm Natalie Gould. I'm Assistant Director at Central South Consortium for Curriculum, and I'll share my screen with you now. Hopefully you'll be able to see the presentation. Okay, so it is a presentation around the report rather than a presentation directly of the pages of the report. So I'll begin here. So Just to remind us, this is set within our national mission. So our national mission there's a quote from our previous minister, but obviously our current minister has reiterated the importance of education and the fact that we are all responsible for the equity and excellence of all young people. Just to remind us that the curriculum reform is set in a huge wider reform agenda of education. So there are lots of acronyms there. They are in further detail in the report, but since 2015 there has been huge wide-scale change of education in Wales, including curriculum reform at the moment, the ALNet, the Additional Learning Needs Act, and reforms to the way we support leadership, our teaching and leadership standards, our initial teacher education, and obviously there's an ongoing piece of work with regard to evaluation and assessment also. So just to stock take now where we are with the actual reform of the curriculum. So the curriculum has now received royal assent in April. So those final amendments to the legislation are now being worked on in Welsh Government and will be published on Hub, aimed for publication in September 2021. And the Act states the new curriculum requirements for all learners aged 3 to 16 in maintained and funded non-maintained nursery education. So all schools and funded non-maintained settings. Now, this was relevant and up to date when I published the report, but obviously there's been some minor changes this week to this timeline. So when the Minister gave his statement earlier this week on the 6th of July, there was a change made to Year 7 implementation. So it's still going to be mandatory for primary schools from nursery to Year 6 to implement the curriculum in September 2022, but it will be mandatory from Year 7 and 8 September 2023, and then the rollout there remains. So there's no change to the final timeline, there's no changes in qualifications, but the mandatory element of implementation from Year 7 now moves to September 2023, and that has been decided by the Minister based on feedback that he has received since he's been in post with regard to the challenges in schools over the past 12 to 18 months with COVID, and the understanding of the significant pressures, particularly on secondary schools with centre-determined grades. However, he did recognise in that statement on the 6th of July that the values that have underpinned and driven our education system during the pandemic, with that particular focus on well-being, linked to your last report and presentation, underpin the curriculum for Wales as well. So lots of the work that has been going on and the changes that have been going on in schools will be good preparations for considerations for the curriculum rollout. Just to remind us then what we mean by curriculum for Wales. So I won't read the slide there, but you can see Curriculum for Wales is the aspiration of that broad and balanced education for all children and young people in Wales, with the 4 purposes at the heart. So the 4 purposes are the shared vision and aspiration of the education system, and should be where all decision making and planning for the new curriculum starts and ends. So to remind us, what do we mean by the 4 purposes? These are the headlines, but underneath these are further detail of what this means in reality. So you can see there, you often hear about ambitious, capable learners, enterprising, creative contributors, ethically informed citizens, and healthy, confident individuals. But I'd ask you again to go into the report and to go into Hub and see the full detail of what we mean by those 4 purposes. Also, a change is what we actually mean by the term curriculum. So curriculum previously seemed to be understood as being schemes of work or schemes of learning, but it's a much wider definition now. So when we talk about curriculum in Wales, our shared definition is everything a learner experiences in pursuit of those 4 purposes. So it encompasses not only what we teach, the content of the curriculum, but how we teach, the pedagogy, and also the why. And the why, again, taking us back to those 4 purposes, which are the aspiration of all our children and young people. This slide, and as I say, there's some acronyms in here again, but there is the full detail in the report, just reminds us of our current curriculum. So our current curriculum, the 2008 version, you can see on the left-hand side how it was organised and what it contains. And on the right-hand side of this table, you can see some of those things still remain. Some of them have changed minorly, some of them have changed significantly in Curriculum for Wales, but ultimately this is transformational change. So even some of the parts that look very similar and some of the parts that still remain, we need to look now through the lens of the 4 purposes, through the lens of the aspiration and the vision of Curriculum for Wales. The 6 areas of learning and experience are replacing, although not replacing in the true sense of previous subjects are gone, but what they do is their ways of organising those subjects. So previous subjects like music, like technology, like science, etc., they're all still there, but they're grouped together within 6 areas of learning. And that has been done to achieve better connections between subjects. So that is there to support learners making sense of the connections between subjects, between disciplines, and a way of organising those and bringing staff working together to plan together and bringing those connections alive for learners. So there's certainly an aspiration within Curriculum for Wales that those connections are there and they're planned for to support learners in understanding curriculum, learning and teaching, but also being related to that, to the world around them. Also, a huge aspiration and a way of organising curriculum is the 3 to 16 continuum, and that is really important, and you will see in the report I've stressed the importance of primary schools and high schools working together in planning the curriculum and the teaching approaches, because that is really fundamental to achieving that 3 to 16 continuum of learning. Further guidance is available already on Hub, but there is further guidance being worked on. So the whole of the curriculum was co-constructed by schools working with Welsh Government, regional consortia and experts from around the world. And this co-construction is still ongoing. So those groups actually wrote the content of the curriculum, the framework, but there are now a number of documents being produced to give further guidance. So you can see those. There are consultations open until the end of next week for all of these. I'd ask you to look at them, to make a comment on them if you feel strongly about any of the content in them. And then again, these will be published in final document, and the deadline for that at the moment is December 21. So all of those will support the workforce in planning and realising the new curriculum. This document is really important. However, it is being revised at present. So again, the Minister in his statement earlier this week talked about this document, this Journey to 2022 document. This is it is a shared expectations document. So it was worked on with Welsh Government, the regional consortia and Estyn to give some clarity to all of Wales, school practitioners, parents, pupils, governors, stakeholders, local authorities, everybody in Wales to agree what are the shared expectations for schools in their journey to 2022. This is now, the Minister in his statement earlier this week said this is now being refreshed through the eyes of where schools are at this moment in time. So we're looking again with the parties who initially looked at this document and talking to schools and talking to school leaders about what the content needs to change to. And as I say, one of the things that has changed is moving that implementation date for year 7, but also the guidance and the expectations being made clear again about what are the phases for 2022. And sometimes the way this document was organised previously suggested that these phases towards implementation suggested a linear timeline. What is made clear, hopefully in the refreshed version, is that it's not as linear as it may seem. In that first part, schools look at engaging with the framework, engaging with further research, talking to all of their stakeholders and revising and refining their school vision. Once they come into the designing and planning and trialling stage, reflecting back on that vision, amending that vision, etc., needs to happen as well. The same as when they're evaluating and preparing for first teaching, further trialling would go on, maybe further refining of the vision, further research. So it really is an iterative process rather than a linear process. And what we have had is really good examples, and you will see in your report some really good examples of schools within the Vale of Glamorgan who have been working hard through the engagement stage and now on the designing and planning and trialling stage. So just to draw some of those to your attention, as I say, further details are in the report. So Halton Road Primary, working on professional learning, engaging with detailed research as part of their weekly bulletins and weekly meetings. They've been engaging with that research, discussing that research and seeing how it's going to inform their practice. Llansannan and Lanharry Church in Wales Primary School did lots of work on establishing that shared vision. They came to our professional learning sessions in Central South Consortium. They worked with all stakeholders in researching the vision and establishing that shared vision for their school. Some other good examples at the designing and trialling stage. So the Penarth cluster had worked on planning some agreed experiences for their pupils right from age 3 up until 11, that all Penarth primary school children would have the same experiences no matter which school they were in. So when they move to high school, there's that equity in what they've experienced. Ysgol Bro Morgannwg had been working on pedagogy, specifically looking at the pedagogical principles that were part of Successful Futures document and sharing practice across their departments. So lots of good practice that in the report on those different phases of Vale of Glamorgan schools working on at the moment. To remind you again of curriculum vision, so that the new curriculum is transformational change. And with transformational change, we need to start with questions, not answers. So it's about empowering schools to look at what they should teach and why, how that should be taught, the teaching and learning that occurs, and always the question of how will all of these decisions support learners in realising the 4 purposes. And as part of our training that we undertake with school leaders in Central South Consortium, we get them to reflect a lot on those questions at every stage of the journey to 2022, but also thinking about that across a cluster. So having those discussions across a cluster, having those discussions with pupils, making sure there's learner involvement, making sure there's parental involvement, ensuring that the curriculum they are designing, the vision that they are working to is agreed by the whole school community. And again, the cluster working is really important because it is a 3 to 16 continuum of learning. Also, as part of that, we know there is already really good curriculum learning and teaching going on in schools. So the balance between this is not a blank page, this is not starting again for some schools, but it's not retrofitting what they already do just to meet the new curriculum requirements either. So a really important message about, although it's not retrofitting, it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well and starting with a blank page, but it is looking at what is already successful in schools through the eyes now of the 4 purposes and the aspirations of the new curriculum. So we have a comprehensive detail of professional learning and support in Central South Consortium for schools. The cross-regional programme has been agreed by the 4 regions and has been available right across Wales for senior leaders, middle leaders. So that has been all online learning at the moment, and you can see the detail of some of those programmes in the report. We've had very good engagement across the region on the programme. The figures that are in your report are up to 31st of May, but in the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks of June and early July, we've had another 1,000 practitioners and school leaders joining us in professional learning events. So up until 31st of May, 52% of Vale of Glamorgan schools have participated in the cross-regional programme. However, beyond the cross-regional programme, many of our programmes that are more specific to certain areas of learning or certain subjects that tie in with Curriculum for Wales, you will see the details of that in the report as well. And just under 1,000 practitioners across the Vale of Glamorgan have participated in Central South Consortium professional learning during this year. Also, to enable schools to work together and to ensure that our vision in Central South Consortium of empowering schools to improve outcomes for all learners, there is a strategy called the Central South Wales Challenge. So again, in the report, there's further detail on this. But what the Central South Wales Challenge does is enables particularly school-led and school-to-school working. So I'll just put the diagram up just to give you a flavour of what we mean by this. So the left-hand side, the grey side, is our professional learning collaborations, and we give grant funding to schools to enable them to come together and collaborate. And a particular focus, obviously, last year, this year, and moving forward has been collaboration with regard to curriculum reform, pedagogy, well-being, all the things that underpin everything we've heard about in this meeting. So whether that's through school improvement groups, which are cross-local authority groups working with their clusters, school leaders working on self-evaluation and school improvement planning, or whether it's through Central South Consortium facilitated networks or their own network schools have instigated, there's a pot of money that supports schools to collaborate. Everything that's on the pink side, the right-hand side of the diagram, are again school-to-school working and lots of school-led, but this is professional learning opportunities. So again, lots of these are collaborative, but they're led by either school-based practitioners who work on behalf of the region, and some of them are led by our own internal staff as well. So lead practitioners and foundation phase hubs, we've just refreshed. So a number of schools across the region applied to lead certain subjects, networks, areas of professional learning across the region, and we fund them to be released from school to co-construct and work with our regional staff. In the last 10 days, we've had AOLE, so Area of Learning Network meetings, and that have been facilitated by those lead practitioners and our staff. And again, those have been very well attended. And you'll see in the report a number of available Morgan schools act as lead practitioners for us across the region. School-to-school partnerships then is when some two schools work together on a particular area of improvement. One as a lead school, supporting a school who may need some additional support to school improvement. And again, we fund those schools to work together. And then there's a very comprehensive leadership development programme and a newly qualified teacher induction programme. Beyond that, then we've got a number of curriculum reform pilots and projects. So again, schools could apply to be part of these pilots and projects. Some of them, you've heard about one already, our wellbeing project that a number of Vale Morgan schools participated in. And all of these projects, all of the learning from these projects, any of the resources from these projects are then made available for use of schools right across the region. So we fund schools to participate in those projects, and then the resources are made fully available. What we've also recently launched, and we're on version 2, is our half-termly Curriculum for Wales newsletter. So we understand and realise that there is much information in the system. There's also many updates that happen quite quickly, for instance, the Minister's statements this week. So we try and ensure through our website and through our newsletter, and that's available for anybody. It is just accessible through our website, but that's got all of the most up-to-date information on Curriculum for Wales nationally, regionally, and also some information of things going on in our schools. So in the most recent newsletter, there's a lovely podcast with some of our schools. St Joseph's Penarthur, one of the schools participating in that podcast, talking about innovation schools and the works they've been doing. Alongside that, then we ask school leaders and practitioners to participate in writing blogs for us, participating in podcasts, producing resources and professional learning materials. So all of those are our strategic team working alongside school practitioners and producing information, guidance, resources for all schools to use across the region. I think that's my slides over, but very happy to take any questions or anything else that was in the report that you'd like me to expand on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I think that that's helped, and in conjunction with reading the report itself. So I don't know, has that stunned members into silence, or do members have questions? The former, I think. Oh no, we have. No. Well, I suppose we can take questions from the cabinet member. That's not a problem. So, Liz, do you want to ask questions or just add to what's been said?
It was just a comment, Chair, that this morning we were very fortunate in the senior leadership team to have a presentation by Barry Allen Primary School, and the school has embraced Project Zero, and a number of officers have been working with the school to help them explore a whole range of things, including transport, biodiversity, decarbonising buildings, the whole range. And they've made a little video about what they're doing. But what was really interesting as well was they discussed the head and I have to be rude and say I can't remember the position of the other member of staff that came. actually talked us through how that fitted with the new curriculum, and it made absolute sense. The children were hugely engaged by it, and I made the suggestion that it might be something that Scrutiny would benefit from, to actually, having had a presentation such as this, to see how it works in practice. It's such an absolutely superb piece of work. It's work that's going on in our schools right across the county, but having had them do that work and made a little video about it, then committee might like to see that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think it's always getting down to the schools themselves and seeing what's being done, which I think is probably the most useful. No disrespect to anyone here tonight, but yeah, we've got to look at what schools are doing. I think it would be helpful to have something like that in the future. Any questions from members? Any comments from members? Any comments?
I wondered whether we could have an update in 6 months or so about how this is bedded in, because theoretically we can design absolutely wonderful systems, but it's how it actually beds in, along with all of the other things that we've been talking about earlier this evening, about the actual bedding into all of the schools and whether there are teething problems. And it's good to hear that so many schools are acting as leads to others to offer them assistance and advice, because I think that must come as a much easier way of accepting kind of judgment, criticism, help and so forth, than perhaps having, the inspectorate do it for you, which is the way nobody wants to hear bad news. But I think it's very gratifying that, we can use this peer-to-peer assistance to help people improve, because I think that, taking it from other people who are active practitioners at that moment is much easier for somebody who may be in need of assistance. So I'd be interested to have a kind of update on how this is working 6 months or a year down the line, to see that all of the good intentions behind this have been able to be realised. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's one of the recommendations that we have updates. I think it's a question of deciding at what intervals we want those updates, and perhaps we can take some advice on that. But I've now got Neil, who wants to ask questions or contribute.
It's a very quick question, really, and it's about page 15 of the report, supporting collaborative working on curriculum for Wales, where they're talking about funding and so forth. It simply says for 2021-22, the formula to distribute this funding is a lump sum of £6,000 for all schools. I'm assuming that means for each school, and £100 per FTE teacher. And then it goes on to talk about £30,000 to facilitate professional learning opportunities to meet the specific needs of the sector in special schools. So I'm assuming the £30,000 for special schools goes to a Daith and a Derry, but that each school gets £6,000 rather than all schools get £6,000. Thank you.
Do you want me to clarify that? So each school, so obviously there's grants with regard to curriculum reform. So each school has received £6,000, and then to ensure that there's collaborations that each school will, whether that's within their school or beyond their school, like the Central South Wales Challenge model suggests. So that many would support that. Then obviously scaling that up to larger schools gives that full-time equivalent pot as well. So there's as I say, a lump sum for all schools. The £30,000 then is across the region. So there is a special schools network across the region, and what they use the £30,000 for, the same as the two Welsh medium schools networks of the Ferdingood and Gilead. They use those to work together to look at professional learning that is specific to their sectors. So they manage that pot themselves, and they use that to self-facilitate professional learning that is relevant to them.
Okay, thank you. Maureen, you want to come in?
Yeah, briefly, in response to one of the questions earlier about updates. We have talked to the consortium about the possibility of termly updates now in advance of September next year, when the curriculum will then be implemented. So you can see that progress as we work towards it.
Okay, well, I'm quite happy to take professional advice as when we should be looking at this. What we don't want is to have two too short a gap between updates, so there's perhaps not a great deal to update us on. And equally, we don't want to be in a situation where we, have long gaps between updates, so there is too much to consider and we've missed too much. So,
and I think what you've had today was very comprehensive from that. And I would imagine that if it was termly, it's going to be shorter and far more pointed as to what progress has been made during that term.
Well, I'm assuming as this whole thing starts to move forward, more and more is going to be happening, and there will be a lot more to update us on. Or I'd hope so anyway. So I'd be quite happy if committee supports it to have termly updates. We'll have to work out quite how that fits into the timetabling of meetings, but yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. So if there are no other questions or comments, once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciated, combined with the report. So looking at the recommendations, obviously we've considered the findings. So I think really the only thing we want is someone to move that we have, I think has been suggested, termly updates. Neil is quite happy to do that.
I think termly updates would be very useful. Thank you. I'd like to recommend that.
Okay, well, I'll leave you and Neil to fight out between you who recommend and who second. But I think Neil, to be fair, Neil got in first, I think. So if Neil proposes it and Rhiannon seconds it. So all members happy with that? Okay, yeah, well, I can see assent from Nick and no one else is commenting. So I think we're fine on that. Okay, well, again, thank you. I don't know if you're going to stay and listen to the rest of our meeting.
I'm going to go if that's okay.
That's okay. No problem at all. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come along and give that presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, right. Agenda item 7, the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q4 performance.
That's me, Chair.
Yeah. Now you are going to. You're not going to go through the report line by line, are you?
No, I was going to go through the presentation. If I could just
briefly, slightly, shorter.
Members have got the report and a presentation. Just to say about the report, it is a report on the annual delivery plan, and it presents Q4 monitoring. It's a very detailed report. Appendix A has got the performance against the annual delivery plan commitments. B, the performance exceptions on the actions and PIs, and then Appendix C's got a detailed performance commentary. So I'm not going to go through those. If I could just share the presentation, which you've also got a copy of, and I'll go through this as quickly as I can, Chair. Let's just pull up the presentation. Can you see that? Can you see the presentation?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay, so this slide actually shows the position on the annual delivery plan, and as you can see, it's an overall status of amber against each of the 4 objectives. We then have a section on what we've actually achieved, and I would like to go through the achievements and touch on those. So on objective 1 there, it sets out work, for instance, on the accessibility strategy and some key areas that have been informed by that, improvements in relation to the digital agenda, and support for the emotional resilience of staff, and outreach development support for inclusion in all settings, and then Big Fresh taken on the cafe at Penarth Pier. And for those of you who haven't been into the cafe to sample their wares, I suggest you do, because they're very good indeed. I should have said actually that this picks out some of the main achievements, by all means not all of them. So objective 2 then
comments on work to support young people to secure employment, work placements and training, development of specialist resource base at Whitmore High School, community benefits associated with the 21st Century Schools programme, and the delivery of the trauma and mental health informed training programme across all of our schools. And of course, members will have heard about some of these throughout the year, and indeed officers have touched on some of this during this evening's meeting. Objective 3 comments on achievements around delivering targeted early intervention. So that's resulting in improved outcomes for children and young people and families. The establishment of a multi-agency panel to triage referrals and to share best practice and expertise. The rollout of BACS payments for parents of pupils eligible for free school meals. And then objective 4 highlights the completion of Whitmore High School, improvements to the local environment and active travel routes around schools, progress made on the design of low in-use carbon school at St David's, and the construction of Wales's first net zero carbon school in Wales. It says that in Llancarvan. This is the replacement school building for Llancarvan School, which is actually in Rhys. So the next slide shows the performance status of the actions and measures within the remit of the committee, and it also shows that where performance has slipped, where the percentage which has slipped for non-COVID or COVID related reasons. So as you'd expect, we've also set out where we need to improve. And in relation to objective 1, our work to become more child-friendly, dementia-friendly, and achieve age-friendly status was affected as a result of COVID. So we need to progress that, as well as work on creating an inclusive culture and workplace environment. We need to progress our work on outreach and the, excuse me a moment, I've lost my progress, our regional approach to increasing the ALM provision available to Welsh medium schools. In relation to objective 2, we mentioned there the preparation for the ALN Act, and this actually comes into being in September. And just to say that clearly we've made good progress. This just means that we need to continue. So it's not to suggest that we need to improve on that area. And we need to further our work on improving standards and quality of teaching and learning experiences in schools. And as you'll know, over the past year or so, that hasn't necessarily been our focus, as we have been focusing mainly on continuity and on well-being. Moving on to objective 3, we need to fully maximise the community benefits from out-of-hours use of our facilities. We need to launch and implement Makerspace project in Penarth Library, and respond to the outcome of the consultation on the Council's art strategy. And that will be coming to members not only as a call-in shortly, but the detail of that work will be coming back to scrutiny at a later date. In relation to objective 4 then, we need to progress our work on decarbonisation, and we'll be looking at doing that in relation to the new Centre of Learning and Wellbeing and the Ysgolyderi expansion scheme. We'll be looking to increase opportunities for participation in leisure, art and cultural learning online. We put a lot of opportunities out there during lockdown so that people could access those services, and we'd like to look to continue to increase those opportunities in the future. And we'll be progressing our work to improve the environment around schools. So we have in the presentation a very detailed coronavirus recovery update, and you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to go through all of that. Members have got that information with the agenda, but just to say that many of these areas you'll be aware of as Scrutiny Committee through various reports that we've brought to you, and indeed through presentations that you've received this evening. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, I'll unmute now. I was probably just talking to myself then, which is probably not a bad idea sometimes. But I think it's interesting to see how much the impact of the pandemic has had upon where we are on matters, and it's pleasing to see that the problems where there are non-COVID reasons are very, very small. So that is to be welcomed, I think. Does any, I'm sure members have spent a long time poring over this report. It is a very detailed one, as these reports always are. So does any member have a comment or question to ask? No? Okay, well, so looking at the recommendations, really, should we just note the report and the progress that is being made and the work undertaken? Members happy to do that?
Happy to do that.
Yep, okay. Okay, thank you very much. I don't know what Gemma was drinking then. It looked an interesting glass.
It was water, I promise. Yeah.
Okay. The glass looked very interesting, is all I was going to say. Okay, thank you very much. So if we move on now then to the next agenda item, which is the closure of accounts year 2021. So over to you, Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much. So looking first at revenue for 2021, learning and skills in line with the overall council position has outturned with an underspend. And this is due to a mixture of cost savings due to things like staff vacancies that were held open during the year, some delayed spend as a result of COVID, and also some Welsh Government funding that was allocated close to the end of the financial year. We did have an overspend in respect to school transport, which has been reported throughout 2021, and we will need to keep an eye on that particular area as we progress through 21-22. Out of school tuition reduced cost due to a review that was carried out in September 2019. Overall, in terms of transfers to reserves, schools transferred 5.4 million into reserves, and the number of schools reporting a deficit was reduced to 2 at the end of 2021. And centrally, we transferred 2.1 million. And as part of that, we established a new culture reserve, an additional learning needs reserve, and we also made a transfer into the rationalisation reserve that will help support the rollout of BAM-B. The reserves are all set out in Appendix 2 to the report. In terms of capital, Appendix 1 sets out the outturn and slippage in the capital programme. I suppose in terms of the main things I would pick up from capital, there's been some reprofiling on BAM-B. It's such a massive scheme that we're always going to see some reprofiling, I think, most notably on Pencoitry, although that's still on track for December 2021, I believe. Paragraph 2.21 sets out a grant that we received for capital expenditure in schools. And as this was received towards the end of the financial year, Welsh Government allowed us to displace the funding in 2021 to allow it to be spent in 21-22. And so the funding that we displaced relates to vehicle renewals. And you will see in Appendix 4 then, those schemes are then built in the 21-22 programme. That was all I was going to say on closing, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Do members have any questions? No, I think it's obviously once again the effect that COVID has had on the situation is very apparent from the report. Are there any concerns that the potential problems, perhaps with deficit problems with schools, are really just being held over and are going to come through in the future?
I mean, certainly. I mean, I think some of the funding that we received late in the financial year may have masked issues in schools. And I think, as was reported earlier in committee, the impact of COVID is not fully known at the moment. So I think 2021 was very much a year in which the budgets could almost be thrown out of the window, and you were starting with a blank piece of paper. So we'll have to see how 21-22 progresses, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, we're looking really just at again at the closure of accounts here. So are members just happy to note the report?
Move we note.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, well, a report where nothing much has happened now. The revenue and capital monitoring for the first 2 months of the year, April and May. So again, Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. As Chair alluded to, very early in the year, and uncertainty around kind of impact and funding in respect of COVID. There is a small environment to reflect the allocation of savings, and there are additional pressures in additional learning needs that we'll need to keep under review as we go through the year. The report does note that there's a review of out-of-county pupils attending a Scrutiny and Vale pupils placed in independent schools, and further information will be brought to committee as that review progresses. In terms of other areas of note within capital, additional funding of 150,000 for the childcare offer, inclusion of capital works for a demand pool at Ysgol to deal with that additional demand in the interim prior to the new special school being built. Inclusion of that school maintenance grant that we talked about as part of the closure report. There is quite sizable reprofiling in respect to Band B, and inclusion of additional decarbonisation funding in the programme, and also some reallocation of funding as detailed in paragraph 2.15. But I think, as we've seen in previous years, a lot of those capital schemes get progressed over the summer term. So hopefully we'll have a lot more information for you when we come back in the autumn on the capital programme.
Sorry, thank you for that. Do any members have questions or comments they want to make? As is always said with these reports at this time, it is very early, so it's difficult to really get too much from them. So members just happy we note the report?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep, okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Gemma. You can go back to whatever is in that glass now.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Which I'm sure you should say was just water. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, which is the first quarter scrutiny recommendations and tracking for 2021-2022. I think members will be well used to seeing these reports. If we look at the Appendix A uncompleted recommendations, we've got the first one, 10th of June, which is the regarding the sorry, I'm losing track now of this. Sorry, yeah, the Cardiff and Vale test and trace project. Well, of course, this agenda report was published. This agenda, sorry, was published before the I think Cabinet had a chance of looking at this recently. So I think this is just going to go now on to the next with the next tracking report that will come to committee. So not a great deal to report on that. Looking at Appendix B. Uncompleted recommendations. We've got the the issue of arts central and the arts and culture generally. Well, as members be aware, this has been to Cabinet. There has been a call-in, and that is now going to come to a special meeting of this committee on the 22nd of July. When I was aware of the call-in, and bearing in mind what was looking like a very long agenda tonight, very detailed agenda tonight, I thought it was better that we dealt with this by way of a special meeting, which gives us time to a proper consideration of the call-in rather than tonight. So I'm hopefully members will be happy with that. Then Appendix C, the updated forward work programme 2021-2022. As you will note, there have been a number of reports added since May when the forward work programme was initially approved, including reports from CSC heard at the last meeting and also at this meeting. We also look at reports included on elective home education and pupil development grant and Syrian resettlement. The annual corporate safeguarding report is due to be heard at this meeting, but but officers have agreed that we could slip to the meeting in September, again because of the size of the current agenda. I'm sure members would have wanted that added as well. Suggested task and finish review exercises. Cost of schooling task and finish group met with a very, very helpful meeting, I would say, this week with parents. It's really, we allocated, an hour had been allocated. In fact, we expanded that to an hour and a half. And I think really, even then, we didn't able to give sort of justice to what parents had to say. I'm sure those members that were there, and I can see Neil nodding away there, that a lot was focused on the costs of school uniforms, and I think we found a lot of very interesting things coming out of that. So we may need to look at that further, perhaps asking schools themselves to come along and explain some of the ways that they establish school uniform policies and perhaps the way they're implemented, because there were lots of concerns from parents about that, about the cost, and items that were felt perhaps to be a little bit unnecessary. So we do need, though, I think, to start bringing that to an end. As I commented at the meeting, it's probably one of the longest running task and finish groups that the Vale has ever had, which, to be fair, is largely because of COVID, but I think we do need to start drawing it to a conclusion and coming up with some recommendations, which I think maybe will be quite strong recommendations on some of the issues that we've looked at. So unless there's anything further members would want me to add to what we're looking at, or anything members want to comment on? No? Okay. I've lost actually the I've turned over 2 pages here. I think I'm looking at the yeah. So members happy that we agree the status of the actions listed in appendices A and B, and that the updated committee forward work programme schedule attached to Appendix C be considered for approval and uploaded to the council's website. So members happy to agree that? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 11, members will be glad to know there are no items which I just decided are urgent. Equally, no items under Part B. So as I said earlier, our next meeting is the 22nd of July, when we're going to consider the call-in. So until then, I wish you all well and look forward to seeing you on that date. Thank you all very much.
Bye.
I know.
Bye.
Bye.